All right. So we're gonna sit here and oh man, we're gonna go through these patch notes. I don't know. I don't know. Any initial opinion of what you see so far?
I mean, well, we both looked at them or whatever. Did you see anything like blaring that was like, "Oh, this will fix it"? Like I didn't see any of that.
No.
Like we're ready to go from here or whatever. It's like trying to put out fires. Like it's too late. The force is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. This is definitely a game that's we've said before. It's on our list of disappointments in our gaming lives. So, and the first thing they start out, they come out of the gate with these patch notes here. Um, this is all for the upcoming league. October 17th is when it comes out. So in what 3 days?
Oh, so these are not even implemented yet. I didn't even see that. I was just looking at. I thought these were implemented already. That's. I don't know if that makes it better or worse.
Yeah, this is all the 1.2 build. So 1.1 was the last league, and then 1.2 is this league. They're doing the same naming
Gotcha.
convention or numbering convention that anything else does. So
Well, I didn't play the. But wait, this is second season then? Because like I didn't play the first season, right? You didn't play it either.
I did.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah,
Did
I
you get through like all the what do you call them? The fucking keynotes or whatever, like the save points and stuff, like the altars, the dungeon completion or whatever, like for each zone. You did all that again.
No, they actually had changed that last season, and
Hmm.
you didn't have to reaccomplish quite a lot of it as long as you had already done it on your main character,
Oh,
like the initial game.
so
So
this is second season then right now then.
yeah, this is going to be the second season coming up in a few days.
Oh,
I played the
that's
last league because I saw Janos jump on it, and I was like, have
oh yeah. That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I didn't even pick. I didn't even try to play it. That's why I couldn't remember it. I was like, wait. There was a first season. Like, oh.
yeah. Janos, after ghosting us for 3 years, I coming back to this game, I was like, oh, cool, he's still into it. And then I jump in, and he played a character, and then he quit, and I quit around the same time. And then I don't even have uh,
That's saying
BattleNet.
something though, because like both of you were pretty hardcore, like for the games that you like. Like, so if you both quit around the same time, like, there's no way I would have fucking made it like 20 minutes.
Well, I mean, I, we're gonna be very opinionated when we go through these things. It's gonna be
Yeah.
very obvious, and I can tell. I can honestly say, as a guy that's been playing video games since what the Atari 2600, and you've been playing games. You're a bit younger than me, but you've been playing games since what the 16 bits, maybe Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, or maybe a little later than
Yeah.
that.
The original Nintendo, I remember, like probably the first system, like Duck Hunter and what was the boxing one? I can't remember what the boxing one's called.
Punch Out.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of games under our belt, and there's been games even back then that were like, "Oh, this is bad," and luckily back then we just rented the game. But now, this game is the actual first game that I've ever played that I fell asleep playing. I don't know what it is. It was very front loaded. It's like, here's a campaign. We actually spent time on this, but we're not very knowledgeable, or we're not sure exactly how we're going to do seasonal content, or continue this game. So the end game and the convoluted way that tier 3 world tier 3 and 4 and all that, it just doing dungeons were so boring that after a couple I was dozing off. But
Yeah, it was pretty dry.
yeah, I don't know if they one of the thing this is one of the things that I want to preface before we go through these and really kind of dig in, is the fact that at the beginning of Diablo 3 and even Diablo 2's lifespan, they weren't that good either, or they weren't received nearly as well as they got better over time.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility D4 one day could become better. And that's a kind of coping mechanism for a company that's been very disappointing for a while now. So
Uh,
I don't really I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt because they've already squandered that. I don't believe they deserve it, but I do believe that uh, there's no reason to not keep it in your peripheral in case. I mean, we bought the game, we own it, so
yeah.
unless something egregious comes out and they're like, "Oh, we're putting in like a small patch, but we're charging $5." It's not like they would ever do that. Like, adding a adding a character class and then charging $10. I don't think. But here, but the first thing we got here is the unique items. And I don't know if you went through them. I know you did probably went through this stuff a little bit more than I did. I didn't really see anything that stood out. Did anything kind of stand out or maybe make you think, oh yeah, I remember a build that would be good for or something?
Well, I mean, I only played the druid really. I mean, I tried the whirlwind barb for a little bit, and I didn't like what they were going with that, and they nerfed it to all hell. So then when I did the druid, like, so I only know the gameplay from a couple characters, but like, if you look at all these uniques, it's all like they're buffing so many things, which is like they're trying to enable builds. It looks like, but it's like, why would you have so many builds that are like at their base dog shit that you have to increase? Like some of these percentages are like crazy. You go from like 40% to 60%. Like, what? Why wasn't this tuned in the beginning, right? Like, you have multiple try out. You know exactly where people are gonna kind of go with your legendary affixes, but at the same time, you like only have a couple that are effective. So you're like kind of silently guiding the game. But then now, right, probably after the complaints of everybody, you're like buffing all the unique items that enable builds. Like why? You know what I mean? Like it's a little too late. Like you're now enabling builds after you've already kind of silently focused everyone else's attention to other builds, right? Like, I mean, because how many builds were there per class? It was like one or two, right? Even though they had like quote unquote unlimited choices, right? Like between the skills, they like silently focus you towards certain ones or whatever. But like
Yeah.
these ones, like 60, 80%, like why was this not done in the beginning and why did it take so long? Like I don't understand some of these small changes. Like if that's all it takes to make something viable, like why was it how did it get released not viable? You know what I mean? Like not feel good. Cuz this whole section's all new legendaries, right? And like they're not that like some of them are a little crazy or whatever like the changes to the numbers, but like they're all new uniques and it's like if that's all it took to enable those builds, why was this not implemented either in the skill itself or in the beginning, right? Like, why are these items? You know what I mean? Because there should only be, this is my opinion, right? Like, there should only be like a couple items for each class that like quote unquote enable it, right? But in this game, they made it so every single item you have has to have some type of benefit to your build specifically. That just feels shitty. You know what I mean? Like, you should be able to build how you want, and then depending on like a couple different things, right? Should it like change the style of your build, right? But in this, it's like literally every legendary changes your style of play, or can make it break it, and depending on the roles, right? And like so, this whole new section of like new legendaries just to enable their own builds, like it feels shitty. Like why? You know what I mean? I should be able to pick those skills and use them regardless of what legendaries or what legendary art like skills I've saved, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that's one of those things like we compare it to any other ARPG. There's a lot of skills that can still be utilized and be viable up to a certain point, and then legendaries are usually, you know, kill faster or clear faster or kill the boss faster. It's supposed to make it smoother and more damage, more survivability, that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
this is one of those things. This kind of harkens back to the whole idea. which they didn't do in this. I don't believe they have, and I don't see anything that's indicative of them bringing it back. But set items were like
Yeah.
they didn't do really anything unless you had a specific couple of pieces, and that just it limits builds. That's why Diablo 3 was one or two builds per class, and then all they did was change some numbers around each league or each
Yeah.
season,
Yeah.
and that's how you changed your build. Um, Now, in this in these descriptions, I don't. My personal problem is like you were mentioning this one here, the unlimited energy from inner sight. Your core, why you do. Your core skills have 60-80% chance to spawn caltrops, poison trap, or death trap. That number one, it's a percent chance, which means that it's not reliable technically. And number
Yeah.
two, caltrops, poison trap, or death trap. What does that really do for you? Is that really useful? Is that really helpful? Unless you're doing some sort of trap build, maybe. But even
Yeah.
then, it's like, what is that really doing for you? There's a lot of maybe sounds good on paper. We can't really judge it too hard because we don't know when it's translated into the game. But I'm not really a fan of.
I think I mean, this goes like, and I look through some of these or whatever, but like if you look at some of these numbers, right? Like if you scroll down to what was the other ones, like that one, Tibalt's Will, right? You deal 20 to 40% increased damage while unstoppable in 4 seconds. That seems like simple, right? But like, I don't know why they would implement something like that on an item, right? Like a roll of a legendary. Because like 20 to 40%, right? Like anyone can do that in their head. They're like, that's obviously a very powerful item, right? Regardless of what class it's for. But why, like, you know what I mean? So why are you enabling it, like builds, purely off like a one legendary or like multiple, like two or three legendary rolls that you have to get, right? In a certain percentage. Like that doesn't feel good, right? Like so you deal 20 to 40% more damage while unstoppable. All right, well, what does that mean? I have to build an unstoppable build. You know what I mean? Like I'm gonna spam unstoppable as much as possible. Like that alone, right? Like if you even if you read some of these others, right, the chance to do something, right, or increase damage, like it's like very generic chances to deal 5 to 6 damage. Like that's dumb, but like flat out 20 to 40% more damage while you're unstoppable. Like they make these kind of ultimatum builds, and this goes back to like pigeonholing you into builds, right? Like Diablo is supposed to be pick what you want and you can make anything work, right? Like, and that's what the RPG is goal is, right? Like, whoever is playing this can pick like a style, right? Like, I want to be a dot build, or I want to be an attack build, or I want to be archer build, whatever, right? Like, you pick a style, and then like you want to increase the damage of the output. But like, it always seems like Diablo recently is always pigeonholed people into selecting certain legendaries and styles, right? Like this right here, like so you now have to choose out of all your legendaries to pick up this 20 to 40% increase, right? Because 20 40% that's a crazy number. Like so if you do 1,000,000 damage, you pick this up 40% more. You do 400,000 more damage, right? Like that's a massive number. Whereas these other ones, right, are like dealing 5 to 6 damage. Well, that's dog shit, right? Like that does nothing for you. So like you're pigeonholing people by making these. Like so why would you know what I mean? So like I feel like they're overcomplicating everything, right? They're like trying to get too many levels in their skills, right? And they're trying to get too many items to do, because it feels like they're making items just to fit every single skill. Like, oh, well, you have an item for this skill, an item for this skill, and it'll do this, this, and this, and then they do ranges on it. Like that
Yeah.
still doesn't feel good, right? Because people are smart. They'll look at it and go, well, out of all these, right? What am I going to take? I'm going to take Tibalt's Will, right? Because it has 20-40% more damage, just in general, when you're unstoppable. So if I can be unstoppable 24/7, that item is the most powerful, right? So you don't even look at the others. You know what I mean? So it's like you're already forcing people to choose certain uniques and legendaries just based off the affixes on them, which I don't think that's very healthy for like any type of RPG.
Well, here's another good example of trying to force you to do something. If your build now, if anybody has a build that utilizes your primary resource at a high level, which they've always been pushing anyway, why would you not? There's no reason that you wouldn't want to take this talisman.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another one. Yeah, like 80 to 120% increased damage. Like, well, I guess they like there is your critical strikes that overpower, right? So it has to be a critical and it has to overpower. But like it's like I said earlier,
Well,
right? Like,
well, right
oh
before
well,
that,
this
right
legendary,
before
like
that,
now I'll build towards overpowering and critical strike chance, right? You're like,
well, no, you don't have to. It literally says it in that item. After you spend 300 of your primary resource, your next core skill
yeah.
is guaranteed to overpower.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're right.
So that's all you got to do. It's spam your primary resource, and as soon as you, if there's an icon or whatever it is that shows you that you have overpower, you automatically will critical strike your next core skill and do basically double damage.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Like when you have to start implementing like double, right, or close to like 100% more damage on things because of how underpowered they are, like that's I don't know. That's not good balancing.
No, that again, I think I was saying this before I had to stop the video earlier, but I'm one of the problems, and this is something that Blizzard notoriously did earlier, was they nerfed a whole bunch of stuff and they tried to bring it back down, and then they do things like implement these uniques, or they do things like just over buff or whatever one of the skills or part of the tree, whatever it is. The problem, and this is what I'm kind of noticing, it feels like Blizzard is trying their damnness to not reach a a very obvious bloat. Uh, what is it called when a game starts to? I don't know why it's completely something I
Power
can't.
creep?
Power creep. Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't think of that term, but yeah, it's power creep. But they've implemented power creep from the get go. Because we were getting to, you know, World Tier 4, Tier 3, they got that Ancestral and the other version of the high
Yeah,
Sacred.
sacred. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like there's already power creep that was kind of in the game from the get go.
Yeah.
And then they're
I,
doing this.
I think it's just bad. This is bad math, right? And again, I think it's just overcomplicating like simple systems, right? Like RPGs don't have to be that complicated, right? Like the more you level, right, the more damage you do, and then your gear scales that to a certain, right? But like in this game, it's literally it's not even that your gear has higher, like say your intellect, right, for like caster or whatever, right, or dexterity for whatever. Like even if those numbers are higher, you don't even care about those. You're looking at the percentage it rolls and the damage number, right, on your affix. You're not even concerned about like, is this the a decent amount of armor? Is this whatever? You're literally looking only at the affix and the percentage, and then if it's not meets whatever, you trash it. You know what I mean? So like it even like makes you null, not null, but like kind of bored of looking at gear, right? Like Path of Exile and some of those other ones, like even the yellow items, right? You like look at, right? And if it has the right stats, you're like, oh shit, I can add this or whatever. This, you're literally, as soon as that legendary comes up and you look at the affix on it, you go, that's not as high as the other one, trash. Like you don't even compare stats, right? Like you don't care. Like it could be double the agility or intelligence or whatever that's your main stat, and you don't even give a fuck. You're like, whatever. I'll just pick the affix that works for my build that's higher percentage, right? Like, and it just makes building your build shitty. You know what I mean? Like you don't get to choose like which item is actually going to be more beneficial, right? Like, oh, this one has less of my main stat but more stamina, right? So I'm tankier, right? Like there's no like choosing. It's like, oh, this number is higher than this number, but it's the same affix, so better. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't even care about the rest of it.
Yeah, it's there's like a handful of things that you want to focus on, and then everything else is just convoluted. It's pointless. It's
Yeah.
you don't even really care about it. Um, but that being said, there that's not a lot of unique items. What is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 new uniques. I guess I can't really say that's low or high because there's like Path of Exile for example. They don't typically add that many uniques every league, so that's not too bad. Next up though, legendary aspects. It looks like here we got brand new ones. Is that what that is? Looks like brand new.
Yeah, it looks like all these are kind of new. What are we talking about? So we talk about the uniques, right? How many uniques they're adding?
Yeah, we were talking about
Aspects.
the uniques. We kind of started looking at. Well, we were gonna look at the legendary aspects, and we kind of came to the same conclusion where we're. It's just the same shit. It's more slight power creep, but it's
Yeah.
like you know
And so
you have
those
to.
ones aren't the new ones. Those are just changes. It looks like, right?
I'm not sure. I one of the problems is even though we played heavily for like what about 2 months worth, and
Yeah.
then I played the first league for like 2 weeks until I was like, just in case you didn't know this, the first league was time gated on top of everything, so you couldn't even progress the quest line. You could only do it in chunks.
Seriously? What?
Yeah, you
Why?
have
Like
to.
just like the story?
It's just more marketing to keep people playing the game longer.
Uh,
I mean, that's the same way they did WoW. After World of Warcraft hit a certain spot back, I would say around WoD or something, they had that thing where they would trickle out the content in a way to keep people coming back. Well,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
that actually goes back earlier than that, but it wasn't until then when it became egregious because it was just like,
yeah. Well,
eh,
because like I mean, some of that's expected, right? Like you have to, as a game maker, put some of that in there, right? Like you want them coming back, right? A little taste of that crack, cocaine. But
well,
yeah,
yeah.
like once you exceed like a, like it gets a little much for some of it.
Yeah, I mean, they technically had it going already when they had, their usually 3 patches per expansion that would give more dungeons, in the next tier. But
Yeah,
they also started doing like daily quests or certain mission types or certain like the legendary stuff. You were time gated, so you couldn't just grind it out in a month. You had to
yeah.
wait for each section. So it's kind of like that. They did that with the first season with Diablo, but um, nothing here. Again, this
I mean,
I was
I would batch these with the new uniques, right? Like a lot of this is like we had a bunch of complaints about these types of builds, right? So here are items and new affixes that will either increase that or fix them, right? Like, which is why, like, I don't know. This if you're, I don't know. This goes to game theory, right? Like the basis of the game being made when they did this. If you give that much power to items, what's the point of your core skills, right? Like, what is the point of me clicking on the skill tree and adding points to that skill to get an increase in damage, or you know what I mean? Because that's in most RPGs, that's where most of the power is, right? Like putting the skills and abilities together in a certain way, right? Like, oh, if I stun and then I follow up with this skill does 2 times damage to stun enemies, so I combo them, right? Like you start making like intuitive, connections with those. But in this game, it's literally like all like it doesn't even matter what you click in really. Like if you have a skill that like gives you a point to that skill and you have the affixes for it, you can still run that build. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't even have to click into it in your skill tree and it'd probably still work. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Like like I feel like this is like a combative philosophy of like game making, right? Because we're used to the old school, like you put points into what you want, and that's where most of the power comes from. Now the items you get, right, increase that, right? They don't turn it one way or the other. They just increase it, right? Or other items are valuable for different builds, right? Like this is a Frost Nova Stork build from D2, right? Like that. There's certain items that increase that play style, and then there's other items that increase the different play styles, right? But in this, it's like literally all you have to do is pick your affixes. Like you don't even care about the item. I don't know if I agree with that.
yeah. I mean, Even comparable to something like, let's say, Path of Exile, the uniques in that game. Sure, there are a handful of uniques or things that you're gonna want for a build, but there's not a lot of uniques that legitimately you have to have that or the build doesn't work. Any
Yeah,
good
yeah, exactly.
build, yeah, any good build, it just works. And it may not, you may not do, you know, even red tier maps, or you may not do, far into the end game, but it's scalable. You can get a unique
Yeah.
or this and that helps you. In this
Yeah,
game,
exactly. Yeah.
it,
It just like yeah, like I was saying, like the amount of impact these affixes over the item itself is just not to me, right? Is not good game just concept, right? Like I don't care what the item rolls, right? Like I don't care what the armor is, I don't care what the strength or intelligence or whatever set I'm looking for is. I'm literally looking for like two or three things. I need this affix with like two or three of these rolls, right? That's all you're looking, and that's just boring, right? Like PoE and some of those like other RPGs, right? Like in PoE, right? Like you get an item, you're looking at all of it. How much health am I getting? How much resistance am I gonna get? Right? Like, what do I have that I'm gonna lose on some like to replace this? Right? Or what can I get rid of? Or what can I gamble on? Or what can I roll to make this better? Right? And it have like like you can feel it, right? Like slowly, right? But these is literally game breaking. Like if you don't have some of these affixes in D4, you can't do your build. Like that's the dumbest thing. That's the dumbest concept to me, right? Like I could build it perfectly on the tree and like get everything lined up, but if I don't have the affixes, can't run that build. Like what? Like what other RPG does that, right? Like your gear determines if your build is functionable or not. This is bad
which is
concept.
it's really strange even to think about that too in comparison to PoE, because PoE, your character dictates where you start on the on the
Yeah,
skill tree,
yeah,
but
yeah.
everybody can use every skill. This game,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
have classes, you have specific skills per each of those classes,
Yeah.
so it's even more detrimental when you have to force people to collect certain things to make the builds viable, because you now have classes that have full on builds, skills that are assigned to them that are useless. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
in this game,
Exactly. Yeah. That's a feel bad too, because like say you're I mean I didn't play that much of it, but like the necromancer, right? Like I tried to do a summon build. Like I didn't do the bone or the blood, or like I didn't test any of it out. I tried to do just to make the summon side of it work. I couldn't fucking do it, dude. None of the lay fixes like made it. You know what I mean? Like it just didn't feel good. And that's just like I just it's when you as a player, right? Like if your base skills do not function through the normal game, like I get like higher tiers, right? Like PoE, like yellow maps, right? Red maps, and then bossing, right? And Ubers, right? Like you're increasing your gear, right, to your build specifically. And the same thing should be here, right? Like in D4, right? Like you should be hunting, like if you're an agility character, you should be hunting for a lot of agility, and then maybe a couple legendaries that influence your build a little bit to make it a little more comfortable, like quality of life stuff, not make or break, right? Like because like you said, there's so many skills. When I tried the Necromancer's summon build, I tried all the different summons, right? The warriors, the archers, and then like the mage, I think is the other type of skeleton, and you have to pick like which ones you want. Like you don't get all of them. Just like why can't I get all of them? Right? Like you're restricting. You're so restrictive in your selection that like it goes again to what I said before is like funneling. You're literally choosing which builds are viable and funneling people into them, right? Or like not all people, but like the people who are gonna want to accomplish things easier, more efficiently, are gonna select those. They're gonna be like, hey, this doesn't work near as good as this affix, right? And
yeah,
like they're gonna switch. Like, and it's poor design because you're not giving people freedom to choose what they want to play. Like when I started this, right? Remember, I picked like a whirlwind barbarian because I remember D2 and I played a lot of whirlwind, and that was you know nostalgia a little bit, right? Like cow level while whirlwinding, right? But in this, Whirlwind Barb got decimated within the first week. Remember that? Like they like nerfed the one item that made it like viable, and then they nerfed Whirlwind itself. So it was like not didn't even function properly.
That
Oh,
right there, that right there also highlights the whole problem with uniques building your build is the fact that
yeah,
if they can nerf a specific unique and kill an entire build,
yeah, yeah,
well,
exactly.
that's not good design. I'm trying to get into their heads here, but right now it seems like there's too many ideas that just don't resonate, and it's like almost to a point where they write a bunch of shit on a board and they're like,
Yeah,
okay, let's just
yeah.
make all of this and then let the players kind of iron everything out and figure it out. It's like,
Well, they
no,
think that,
hello.
and then they have to understand players, right? And this is right. They took what D3 had with like the set items, I think, right? And they're trying to make these where you can build kind of what you want, right? Because they're legendaries, right? You don't need the set, but at the same time, like they're sets, right? Like, you're not specifically getting bonuses from a set build, but you're literally running like if I'm doing this skill, I need these 4 or 5 unique or legendaries, right? And these affixes. Period. Right? So you're basically making sets that aren't sets, right? Like so it's the same concept. They haven't expanded from D3 really. Like these D3 sets, right? They change the numbers each season to make this set's now better and now that set's better, right? But they didn't really change the gameplay style, right? Like you still get that bonus and you still similar play style. And this, it's the same thing. It's not like I'm gonna run a necromancer or whatever, like because I did the pulverized build with the druid. It's not like I'm gonna have 3 pieces pulverized and then like 3 pieces of hurricane, right? Like I'm gonna be inefficient in either one, right? And I don't know why Blizzard thinks players aren't smart enough or whatever, play enough to figure this out, right? They're gonna test all this, right? They're gonna put the pieces on and be like, well, let's try this, and every time they try and go out of the norm, right, they're gonna be disappointed. And I think that's one of the main problems with D4 and why it died so fast is people tried all these other different builds and like trying to make their own way, and then they realize like, well, it's basically I got to use these 5 items. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
they've given me. Like I can't spread out and be like, I'm gonna do this with this in my skill tree and kind of have a unique playstyle. Like no, it's not gonna work. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
most efficient way is gonna be what they've already designated.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. There is the fact that they're pretty much displaying that they never learned anything from uh,
Mm-hmm.
Diablo 3, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
which is really ironic because there's quite a lot of the people from Diablo 3 are gone or been replaced, and it's like,
Or picked up D4 in the hopes of redemption, right? And then they're like, well, they must have changed it. They said they're going to be more like D2, more open-ended builds, right? More freedom, right? And then you get this same type of shit. Like, yeah, oh, we don't have sets, but if you want to run this skill, you need these 4 uniques. Okay, well, I call that a set. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what you call it, but that's a set to me, right? Like, I have to run 3 or 4 or 5 specific affixes. That's whatever. And then and that also makes the end game like min maxing dull, right? Like you're looking at items, right? And once you get your like perfectly rolled weapon, let's say, right? Like it needs crowd control damage. Like I'm just thinking of pulverized for when I played, right? You needed like crowd control damage, overpower damage, right? And then like crit damage, right? Because there's a high crit chance in bear form, and I can't remember the interaction that caused you to have high crit chance, but those are like the 3 or 4 things, right? Crit damage, pulverized, or crowd control damage, and then whatever the other one is, right? And each one of those is very specific to that skill, right? So it's like you're inhibiting my freedom. Even if I wanted to go bear, and then instead of pulverize, if I wanted to try and say use maul or whatever other abilities bear has, I don't even know because I didn't even play it, right? Because pulverize was just that strong. You can't even test that out, right? Like it's gonna do no damage, right? Because you don't have those affixes. They're not in the game, right? And I
yeah,
and from what I've seen in the patches with the new uniques, right, and then now these Paragon levels that we're looking at right here, like look at these numbers, right? Like for every 5 strength within range, right, your Paragon tree, your Dust Devils go from 13 to 40%. What kind of percentage difference is that? You see, you know what I mean? Like, so if you meet the minimum, right, you get 13% increased damage. All right, cool. But if you have the max amount of strength in that Paragon tree, right, and that's your main skill, right, you're obviously going to go for that, right? 40% more damage. Well, what are you going to go for, right? Like, are you just going to do 13%? Even if you don't like Whirlwind? Well, no, you're gonna build a 40% increased damage off of that. You know what I mean? Like, it's another pigeonhole, right? So now you have items that are pigeonhole, like with the affixes, people to pick certain skills, and now you have your Paragon tree also like pigeonholing you into certain skills, right? Like, how much bonus damage can I get for these skills, right? Depending on, like, because this is the Barbarian one, right? So from these two, you see Earthquake or Whirlwind, right? And then Earthquake, right? The percentages increase in damage are about the same. Well, what do you think is going to happen, right? They're going to test both of those, right? And people are going to go, all right, I got 40% increased damage on Whirlwind, and I got 40% increased damage on Earthquake. Let's go test them. And and I don't know what I haven't played it, right? So, but depending on which one's stronger, they're just gonna pick that one, right? Like, people aren't dumb, right? Like, just because they might like one playstyle over the other, they're still gonna pick what's more effective, right? So in
Yeah.
my head, right, the Whirlwind one's probably gonna win, right? Because 40% increased Whirlwind damage, it ticks faster, right? And it has bonuses. I think it has bleed and something else on it, right? And I think it reduces the amount of crowd control or something while you're whirlwinding, right? So it's a little safer.
Now,
Well,
well, Dust Devils is a separate. In that like little like whirlwinds like, or little tornadoes that come out.
yeah. So there's a
So
there's a
if you look at
there's like a
this,
there's an affix that like gives you the Death Devil's
yeah.
affix, right? So you
So
have to have that item just to even get this, right?
So if you look at this, what you see is you got your Twister, which is the top one, and then Rumble is the bottom one. You got your Dust Devils deal 13. It's exactly the same, by the way. Those two damages,
Yeah.
the Earthquake and the
Well,
Dust
I
Devils.
meant like
But look,
gameplay style, right? Like, so Dust Devils and Whirlwind, it goes with Whirlwind, right? So like that play style is a little safer, right? Because you can move while damaging things,
yeah,
and so it's a little safer, right?
yeah,
But
but
Earthquake, I think, is kind of like an AOE, right? So it's also a little safe as well. But people are gonna test the damage out. Is my main point, right? Like, they're gonna go and do a boss, right? And if it's easier to kill with the Dust Devil's affix, right, to kill a boss, right, in a dungeon or a rift or whatever, over the Earthquake one, they're gonna fucking pick that one, right?
well,
So you're like pigeonholing people into testing these.
I'm gonna jump in right now. I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm pretty damn sure reading this right here, just going by what I'm seeing. I think the Dust Devil's gonna do more damage because number one, you got again, the top line is the same on both. But if you look
Yeah.
at the additional bonus, you got 13% increased damage for 4 seconds after creating a Dust Devil. The
Oh
other
yeah, and
one,
that's all damage
that's
too.
all
That's not.
damage. That's all your
Yeah,
Dust Devils. So you got a bunch of multiplication adding to, or a bunch of increased damage being added to all those different aspects. The
yeah,
bottom one is just an raw 10% increased damage to crowd controlled enemies after an earthquake.
yeah,
I'm pretty sure the top one's better. I mean, granted, the
yeah,
raw damage is going to be, but there's also the fact that I guarantee Dust Devils hit faster. So
yeah, exactly, yeah. So
I
you're
think the
hitting
Dust Devils is
13%
probably going to.
more damage per Dust Devil, right? And if you have
Yeah.
5 hitting the same enemy, well, that's now whatever that percentage, right? 60 fucking 3 or 4 or whatever the number is, right? 64% more damage because each Dust Devil is hitting that much harder, right? Whereas the other one is 10% earthquake damage. Okay, so it's 10% for only crowd control enemies and after an earthquake. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, the language. This goes back to the same thing I was saying in the beginning, right? Like, it's overcomplicating mechanics in the game in numbers, right? Like, because when you put these up, even like, why? Like, why make it this complicated? Like, I don't want to need to have a math degree to figure out that, like, you know what I mean? Like, how much average damage I'm doing per Dust Devil, and then, oh, there's an additional text to it, so let me read that, right? Like, for the most part, people are gonna too specifically read into these. They're gonna go test them, right? And they're gonna pick which one is more effective.
Well, that's what I feel like every time they do a patch, and they kind of did that in Diablo 3. Is like every league or every season or whatever, they're gonna do all these types of changes, and that's gonna keep the ones that are really hardcore into this game. Is gonna keep them occupied. They're gonna come in, they're gonna run all their tests, then they're gonna say, "Yep, this, and this are all still crap. This and this got a buff. This is now viable, and it wasn't before." And
Yeah,
then it's
I
gonna
think I
reverse.
think though that a lot of those people that do make it that far into it are gonna be the YouTubers, right? Like most normal people are not gonna test all of this, right? Like they're gonna have their class, they're gonna pick their what the skill they like, test it out, and if it feels like shit, they might quit right there. You know, they might not even test the other builds, right? And that's the other problem with pigeonholing people into more effective builds is like you're making certain ones better than others, right? And if they don't like that playstyle, people will just stop playing, right? Like if I don't like Earthquake build on Barbarian and it is actually better, I'm not gonna play it just because it's better. You know what I mean? That's just me though. Like I'm not gonna play that just because it's better overall. But like even like so if you scroll up a little bit to like the numbers on the Necromancer tree, like this one, like look at this, like the second one, Desecration, right? Like look at the buff that got. Increased damage from 20% to 6. You're tripling the damage of it. You know what I mean? Like that's insane to me. Actually, not tripling. That's bad math. Not tripling, but like
Well, you're
you're tripling the bonus damage, right? Increased damage, right? So you're
yeah.
not tripling overall damage, but you're tripling the bonus damage, right? Just off your Paragon, right? And this is another like so you're forcing people into certain affixes with certain Paragon trees, right? That increase certain skills. And this is just it's crazy to me that you have to be this complicated in your numbers, right? Like cuz if you look at the skill above, right? Your corpse skill deals 3% to 14%, right? So obviously that skill does a decent amount of damage, right? Like it's not as buffed as the other one, right? So then they go, okay, well desecrated ground's kind of lackluster. So how much do we need to increase that by? 20% is the starting? 20%. Like holy fuck. You know what I mean? Like that if you're off 20% when you're making these, like that's just laziness, right? Like they're looking at this and going, "All right, well, let's look at the numbers now. Oh, well, we need to increase this one by 20% minimum." Like what?
I mean, another thing about this, looking at the desecration, and again, this is all dependent on verbiage. I don't know how they translate it, but if you look at the regular bonus, the 19 to 59 or the 20 to 60% increased damage, you see the
Yep.
additional bonus. It says you deal 15% increased shadow damage while in desecrated ground. It says you deal, which in anybody that's played pretty
Yeah.
much any game, that means you have to do the damage. However,
Yeah.
desecrated ground is casted
Yeah.
is
We.
cast by you. So what does that mean? Does that mean it's another 15% on the desecrated ground damage? So does that mean that that's
Yeah.
actually 75% increased damage total?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how that interaction. I doubt it. Right. Like, and this is what I say. Like, when they get too complicated with these numbers and stuff, like their math doesn't do what like people might read it as. Right. So that's another issue. Right. Like with these affixes and skill fixes and Paragon fixes is like depending on how someone reads it, right? They're like, "Oh, this definitely is gonna work," right? And then they test it and they go, well, "That's not working." Well, did the devs even think about that, right? Like, did they even think about the desiccated ground doing 15% more? Because if you're in, like you said, right, if you're in desiccated ground, does your desiccated ground now do 15% more on top of all that? I don't know, right? And
As
how do
long
you
as it's shadow damage, it should.
it should, yeah. Like according to how it's read. But then, what they intended, right, comes into play, right? Like whoever worked on the necromancer section, right, like might not have intended it to work that way, right? I mean, it just goes, I don't know, it's kind of lazy. Kind of lazy.
Well, our opinions of all of this, we've kind of covered it in a sense that really, really gives a perspective of how we felt about Diablo 3 and the way that they're handling this game. It's very similar. I think a lot of things are overlapped.
Yeah, exactly. I think they didn't get a nut either, like what do you call it, third party influence, right, or outside ideas, right? Like they didn't listen to the community, like the community and what they thought would help fix it, right? Like they just took what they had, and then instead of like I said with the set thing, instead of saying, oh, this is a set, they went like, oh, well, if you're using this skill, right, these are the affixes you need, right? Like, so you're still hunting sets basically, right? Like,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
just the
it's still
overlap,
this.
and it's just lazy, right? Like, and then and it's weird because like it's lazy, but it's not lazy, right? Because I get like trying to be, add these numbers, and I get it's hard to balance, right? Like I'm not a numbers guy, I don't know for sure, but like, how do you not just keep your base, right? And this goes back to what I was saying, like RPG basics, right? Like what you click in your skill tree should influence your character's gameplay, not what affixes you find on the ground, right? And that's what you were saying earlier about like, oh, as soon as and if you're smart about it, right, you can flip flop your build all the time in this game, right? And like, oh, I got this affix now, I need to run this, right? Until you get your library built up, right, where you have all the affixes saved, right? That's like the big thing for the leagues, right? Like I'm sure you have to hunt the affixes again. I don't know. I didn't play it, so like, is that something you still have to
Yeah,
do? Like,
I'm pretty. Yeah, you still had to clear all the dungeons and get the affixes back.
see, that's dog shit, right? To me, like, why would I want? You know what I mean? Like, why would I want to hunt those again?
Yeah, we're about to jump into the next section, which might resolve some of the issues, but I have a sneaking suspicion that there's going to be a lot of no shit. They're now doing that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop the recording and start it again for the next section. So Endgame Activities. Not a lot here. We got Legion events reduced from 30 to 25 minutes. I don't understand why uh, Legion events. I'm assuming uh,
I mean,
Monster
they
Hunter
increase the
1953.
experience
Yeah.
gain, but like, I don't know. I said like some of the like a lot of these in-game activities, they reduce the timers, increase the rewards, right? This goes back to pigeonholing people into certain activities. Like, what if I don't give a shit about either one of these? You know what I mean? Like, the loot's not that good, right? Like, at least from when we were playing, like, world bosses weren't shit. Legion weren't really shit either. Like, so what? They're reduced time and increase experience. I don't care personally, right? Like, I don't care. Like, the best experience is probably still going to be dungeons, and you're repeating the same dungeons over and over, right? Like, and it's not like you get increased rewards or anything. At least from what I've seen so far, like they haven't increased the rewards for rifting, right? So these other activities, like, why are you increasing the like trying to funnel people into these things when they're not as lucrative, right? Like, it doesn't make people are gonna know that these aren't as lucrative. If they're not gonna do them.
Yep. And like just reducing the spawn time of world bosses and so I'm sorry, but I feel like that's one of those things where they need to go back to the drawing board. Number one, you've already mentioned it before. They need to reevaluate loot tables and how the bosses are worthwhile. And then two, 6 to 3.5 hours. Why is there such a long
Yeah,
time
yeah, I don't
between
know.
spawning the boss?
Well, and this will go to even just the game itself is like completing these world bosses doesn't feel satisfying, right? Like like the first one you do, you're like, all right, cool, whatever. Like, it's pretty quick, whatever. Then you do the next one, and it's even worse. Like, it's even faster, right? Because people are more geared, right? Like, because it goes up tiers, right? You go from like world to tier 3, right? You do one, and it's actually people doing mechanics, right, and doing what they're supposed to, and then tier 4, people just bombarding it, right? Like they're just standing and shit. They don't care. You know, so it's like no one cares. Like the rewards aren't worth anything, and they don't feel satisfying to do. Right? Like I don't feel accomplished by killing these world bosses.
Yeah. mounts. They try to tweak the mounts so they don't get stuck as much. I think the biggest thing, and this is something that's pretty evident from the beginning, is when they were doing this whole idea of an open world and to be more RPG and less action was to also put their artistic abilities into full effect. And to do that, they made the horse very realistic looking. I mean, to be fair, very good animation, very realistic the way it turns and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But that's not good gameplay, especially when you want it to be action. And so one of the problems was you got stuck so much. It was cumbersome to turn it around, and then you couldn't break through it with the barriers that were always in your way. There was so many things that was like, cool, I now have been demounted or dismounted, and uh, I have like a 10-second cooldown to get back on it. So
Yeah.
they're trying to tweak that stuff. I don't. Sure, it looks fine, and you can now break through barricades when you do the spur, which is the sprint.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't have like really much for that section either. It's just quality of life, right? Quicker to move around, but it also goes back to you can teleport everywhere, right? So it's not like you're running huge distances, right? Like, so it's kind of silly for them to input these barricades in the beginning, right? Like, why, why? You know what I mean? Like, why? I'm trying to run somewhere, right? It's not like I'm don't have the waypoint or anything, or I've been here before. So you should just let me run to it. Like, no, well, you gotta teleport here, and then we're gonna put a barricade here for mobs. And if there's an event, like you're more likely to get barricaded. Like, what? Why?
Well, the,
Like,
the the funniest thing about this is the fact that they're making it so that the mount works better, so to speak. And like you said, you teleport everywhere. But not only that, they've even gone further with contradicting the whole use of the horse by saying now you can go straight to dungeons with the last patch.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they're like slowly removing the need to even have
yeah.
the
What
mount.
would you really even need the mount for now, right? Like Lilith altars and completing your bonus missions or whatever the fuck that is, your side stuff. Like,
Which, but most of that doesn't need to be completed anymore. So it's like,
that well, if you've done it already, right?
yeah,
That's the
as long as you've done
caveat
it,
to
yeah,
that. Yeah, I which I haven't, right? So like that's
yeah.
another thing. Like I won't ever do that.
I hate the. As a side note here, the fact that Lilith statues existed and the or altars existed was a big kick in the head because it's like,
Yeah,
why did you gate literal skill points and other things
yeah,
that are part of your character behind arbitrarily finding some stupid fucking altar in the world?
yeah. They
What?
and I think we talked about this earlier. One of the ideas I had was to put the Lilith altars in dungeons. Right? If I'm gonna be grinding dungeons anyway, put them in the dungeons. That way, you encourage people to go through all the different dungeons to get like the altars of Lilith.
Yeah.
Right, but now you put it in a system where it's in the open world, right? Like to run around and explore. Like cool is an extra thing, but like the fact that you said that it actually gates you on your progression is ridiculous.
Yeah. And then on top of it, after everybody complained enough, they were like, you don't have to do it anymore as long as you've done it once. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, whatever.
But then you get people like me, you're like, I'll never do it, right? Like I won't do it. Like I just period, I won't do it.
And you're missing, like, I think it's like 50 stats or something like that. And then you're
Yeah,
also
probably.
missing 10 skill points.
Yeah, which
Like,
is
that's,
huge.
that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that. I didn't like that from the beginning. They did some town adjustments. Big, nothing here is really special. They added stashes are and certain NPCs are closer to the waypoint and following. Like another. This is just another example of, and this is a complaint that'll pretty much always be with games like this. Is their ambition was to be open world and all this shit. So their villages are not set up to be efficient. They're set up to be realistic. So
Yeah.
you obviously aren't going to have a spawn point and then like just just five fucking vendors standing around it for efficiency's sake. You're gonna set it up as a town and force people to run around, and It's a pain in the ass, and on top of it, they let you use your mount, but they don't let you use the sprint function. Anyway, there's a bunch of monster changes. I don't. They did a bunch of um, rebalancing. Sure, whatever works for you.
Yeah, if you look at the monster 1 and 2, 1 to 50, and then tier 3 to 4, there's 5 levels missing. What? That's the math on math. Where's level 50 and 55? Where's
Actually,
level
that is actually that is kind of
77?
funny. I don't know how that actually goes back to the sacred and
Yeah, the
what's it?
ancestral shit. Yeah, like what?
Oh.
There's just mobs that aren't that level anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what that is or what they did. You know what though? This is a giant list of patch notes. And again, a lot of it is redundant and really unnecessary, but I guarantee something in here might say, "Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
but
by
like
the way,
for how big these patch notes are, like they didn't address a lot of the main. Whatever, yeah, we'll go through it. Whatever. All right. So in this one, yeah, I don't really see anything big out of the world tiers except missing monster levels.
this experience updates, there's no reason to go through this because they
Yeah,
made
they
that
just increased.
wonderful video that stated that if you had a
Actually,
thousand XP,
scroll up to that second part. So you see the
your mic changed, by the way.
Oh, how about now?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I just had to adjust it. So world tier 3, 4, all right, more. Scroll down a little more. Completion, all right. So you get less completion percentage for tier 2 than 1, but then more for tier 3 than 2. Like what? What? What the fuck? And the same thing with the turn in for Grim Favors. Like what? The
I,
first and second tier are more percentage gain than tier 3 and 4?
I you know,
Or is that
again,
on top of that?
that I think the problem here is it's saying tier one, like for the first thing you were saying, the tier one is
Yeah.
increased by 100%. I think that it's 100% increase over what it is right now.
Mm.
So that's why
Okay,
it
okay,
looks kind of
okay, gotcha.
funky.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's why it looks kind of funky. But I think that it makes sense. I don't know how, because we already know that tier two. One of the main reasons to even do tier two was the fact that it could be done from the beginning, and it was supposed to be a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
harder and more XP. So
Yeah.
I think that's what that was. Here,
Okay.
some miscellaneous stuff. I don't. What is this? Just little bits and pieces. There's nothing here that's really noteworthy that I noticed. Balance changes. I think here's where the you were worried that there was so much left in this set of stuff, but I think it would be disingenuous for us to go through some of the balance changes. This is these are unique changes. Like this is a unique butcher
Yeah.
fever. Sure, they've changed percentages. Increased by 160%. I don't know what it was originally. I don't think it says. But
Yeah, that's the other thing with some of these, right? Like they don't give you like some of the numbers to calculate some of these differences.
this one here, Frostburn, cold damage affix is replaced with attack speed. So there's some changes to some of the existing things in the game. Sure, this is probably the biggest goof up I've ever seen. People were complaining from the get go that this game's resistances weren't working quite correctly. If you read this, we're
Yeah.
both we're both knowledgeable of the VA, the Veterans Assistance, and the VA. The way their percentage works when you have disabilities is your first percentage up to 30 is just raw. So say you got a 30%. Then every subsequent percentage was just a percentage of the remainder. So
Yeah.
say you
Yeah.
got a 30%, your next percent was a 10, so it was actually 10% of 70, which is the remainder. And that's what Blizzard did for the fucking resistances. That's how
Yeah,
it's been screwed up all this time.
Yeah, that's kind of unexcusable, right? Like, and how they didn't catch this before release is ridiculous. Like, 'cause even talking about it is like, what?
But I mean, you followed, right? You know
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I got it.
But like
Yeah,
right
it's
here, it
silly.
shows 20% resistance. The next one, the next 20% resist would actually be only 16. Why? Because 20% of 80 is 16.
Yep.
And then the third 20% would be only 12.8. That's because it's 12% or it's 20% of 64. That's
Yeah.
what was happening. It's like, how did you do this?
Well, and then they capped it. It looks like it's 70% now. Like, so they're not gonna let you get the full benefit of resistances, which it was intended to work that way to begin with. Because
Well,
now, like, are they trying to? I don't know. I don't know. It's because
in
so many people stacked armor.
yeah, but in fairness, like PoE only lets you go to 75 with unless
Yeah,
you
that's
have
true.
special
Yeah,
things
yeah,
to
yeah.
increase it. But the thing is, just like in PoE, they now did this. They've now made it so that tier 3 is a negative
Oh, yeah.
25% and 50% on tier 4. So they did the same
Yeah,
thing as Blizzard or as PoE did.
yeah.
This is just a bunch of things of like how items can roll percentages. Nothing really necessary to bother here. Armor, it's just values. Nothing really big here. Uh, Damage bucket updates. This is just like your overpower, your critical strike. This is just just changes, more arbitrary changes, just because they want to try to balance things. But I don't think it's going to be balanced. I don't think it's going to do as much as they think it's going to do.
Well, I think when they make these changes, right? Like, like even if you look at the overpower bonus numbers, right? Like, so if you read some of all those like adding contributors to that damage number, right? Like, all right, so you look at all those, right? But every class has the ability to either do critical strikes or overpower, right? They're gonna test both of these, right? And then figure out which one's more effective. You know what I mean? So like they keep making these extensive changes to each like, oh, we gotta do these changes to overpower. Okay, well what happens if you either nerf it too hard or don't increase it enough? Right, and then you buff these critical strikes or other type of damage modifiers. How does that affect the class, right? Like, oh, so instead of overpower stacking on my bear, I'll just stack critical strike damage, right? Like if it does more, right? And it doesn't leave it open to like the spread and like them trying to balance it. Well, I guess what I'm saying is that them trying to overbalance things and overcomplicate it is going to cause problems in the future, right? Like, because people are going to find out which one's more effective anyway, right? So like, the point of them making all these changes, right, is going to blow up in their face, right? Because certain builds are going to perform better, right, regardless of what they change, and it's hard to constantly keep you know trying to adjust these when your base game is not balanced or like not conceptually equalized, right? Like you have too many contributing factors, right? You have affixes, you have legendaries, you have paragon points, you have glyphs. Now you have on top of that what you're adding onto certain types of damage, right? Overpower, critical strikes, right? It's just too much. It's too complicated, right? Like you're overcomplicating like a simple like I have this amount of power, I should be doing this type of damage, right? Like now you have so many things going into it that if you're trying to like troubleshoot this, right? Like how do I do more damage in my build? It's gonna be so hard to figure out, right? Like you're just gonna wait for the streamers who test all this out or whatever to tell you, right? Like, oh, it's this build with these affixes, right? And then you're gonna go and put those on and be like, you know what? It is those. It does work. Like, okay, you know what I mean? It's not like there's no exploration, right? There's no like figuring it out for yourself. I don't know. I feel like they're just trying to overcomplicate so many different things, right? Because no one's gonna remember all this. Like, look at the one above that, right? Like the vulnerable damage one. Like, look, like increased, right? But you have to get the vulnerable debuff on you, right? But if you have the debuff, right, then all these apply. No one's gonna remember all these rules. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna slot
Well,
this in, they're gonna slot all these in, and then go test it.
remember that's one of the things. Number one that they're not addressing, and number two is one of the most convoluted and one of the most messiest parts about this game is the fact that there's so many stupid stats. So people are already used to not giving a shit about that stuff. It's like, oh, I need to roll an item that has, plus 15% damage if you're behind the enemy on a Tuesday during a full moon. Like,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
the fuck? That
yeah.
shit is
Yeah, and
that's
this is
always
one of
been
the
a problem.
things. One of the things I think PoE does well is they pretty much have right. Like you have a very few multipliers, right? Like you have certain skills and things in your tree that'll multiply your damage, right? Like 15%, 20%, whatever. Was pain attunements the low life one? Like if you're less than 40% more damage or whatever, right? Like stuff like that, right? Like there's not too many multipliers in that game. Almost all of it is additive, right? Like flat damage, right? Like increases cold damage 27 to 300 on attacks, right? Or spells, right? So that's easy to figure out. It's easy to conceptualize, right? Like it's easy to go, okay, if I'm spell damage or I'm attack damage, right, and I have a cold spell, if I get this flat cold damage, it'll increase it X, 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 and X, right? Like I can see that, right? But now, anytime you do anything in this game, like, does the formulas that you see on your DPS sheet damage show all this, right? Like, oh, if they have vulnerable and they're this and they're crowd controlled, but you're mixed, right? So you have, you know what I mean? Like, how do you, right? The only way to do it is to test it, right? And it's the same shit. Like, I don't think this game's interesting enough for people to test all this out, right? Like, and it goes back again
Yep.
all the way to the beginning of they're overcomplicating the genre and their systems that they have in place are just not thought through properly. Like, in my opinion, right? Like, why would you implement so many systems? It's pretty simple.
Well, that's the irony is they're overcomplicating and it's still making it less complicated than PoE. There's a complication to that game that you want to
Mm,
learn, you want to figure out. This
yeah.
game, it's like we have a bunch of complicated stuff. Aren't we cool? It's like, nah, you're fucking boring.
Yeah.
I
Well, and then like to like even figure it out or even like see the difference is like you would need a PhD in math to figure. I mean, maybe not that bad, right? Like I'm exaggerating, right? You don't need PhD, but like you need a pretty extensive like knowledge of how to like do all the math, right? Like okay, so I'm pulverized bear on druid, right? So I have a lot of overpower. I have a lot of high crit damage and crit chance, right? Based on my tree and blah blah blah. Okay, cool. But then when you go to like actually do number, like, do I stack crowd control damage more, or do I stack vulnerable damage more? Do I stack overpower damage more? You know what I mean? Like which one, right? Because one of them's gonna pull ahead, right? So do I want to test all those? Fuck no. I'm not gonna roll. I'm not gonna find gear that has different rolled things on it to test it. I'm gonna wait for. I'm gonna wait for the streamer to be like to spend 1,000 hours on it, tell me, and then go do it. Right? That's not fun though, right? Like you're not exploring anything.
Yep. Which is now that you've said that, that's a great way to transition into the next topic because I don't believe there's really a need for us to go into it, which is why I've been trying to tell you. I don't think the video or this review of these patch notes needs to go too far. Number one, I can real quick scroll down. This I would never give two shits about. I don't care about battle passes or
Yeah.
anything like that. So we go to the bug fixes. Obviously,
I
you
didn't.
can.
I didn't even look at this section.
Well, that's the thing. Bug fixes. If you can't see it on your screen, but on my screen, the the website's obviously a lot wider. Um, I'm just shy of halfway down the patch notes. That's how much of these patch notes are actually of the bugs. It's
Yeah.
about 40% of the patch notes. So
Jesus.
This I you know what? I could slowly scroll down, and if you see something that you want to point out, but to be quite fair, it's a lot of shit that should have been fixed, and
Yeah.
they're doing their thing, they're working on whatever, and there's shit tons of stuff, and it doesn't say every single one of these bullet points, except for a few, fixed, 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 fixed. And these here, this whole section is just barbarian fixes. Like that, these are all things that weren't working properly, whether it be just a UI issue or a calculation, something wasn't working, and those were the fixes. Here's Druid.
I bet there's some like very serious deep like faults in that. Like if we were to look at it and actually be like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Like like when you're supposed to apply vulnerable or weakness or what, expose weakness or whatever debuff or something like that that helps buff like a ton of your damage. I bet there's like a ton of those in there where like, oh, changed where your first cast was the only thing that affected your ability to apply vulnerable. Like, well, it should be every fucking cast, right? Like, and now
I
you're
very
fixing it. Like what?
I wouldn't doubt that there are things like that in this list.
Oh,
But that's why I was like, we really don't need to go through all of these bugs
yeah.
because it's just like these aren't things that people should want to even review. It's like these aren't these aren't things that defend. You can't use these as a defense of yeah, they're trying. It's like, but
No, this should have
the
been done
amount of
to begin
fixes
with.
here,
Yeah.
the amount of fixes here said they didn't try to begin with. Doing it now is not really helping. But
Yeah.
again, I'm not taking away from the fact that they're fixing shit. It's just why now? Why do they have hundreds of people working on this game and all this stuff is just being fixed? Almost, what has it been? 8 months now? Something like that since the release? I don't remember when it was released. Um, and then, yeah, here's Rogue, Sorcerer. Jesus.
Yeah.
Some cooperative play fixes.
Well,
Okay.
actually, the co-op stuff also too, right? Like you have a big game developer like this. Like I remember issues where like fucking um couldn't join the same instance sometimes, or like people like randomly fucking would like Janos. I know we ran into a couple times where like he would start a dungeon and we wouldn't get like the teleporter for it. Like he had to relog. Like it's just so weird. Some of this like some of the small things that should be incorporated into it.
Yep. This here is showing that there's bug fixes because of the fog. Whenever somebody got to the boss and the fog would pop up. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know where. I didn't see it. Maybe we skipped it or I passed over it because again I don't want to spend too much time on some of this stuff. Uh, but one of the things about the dungeons is that they're removing the need to do the dungeon specific activities. So you no longer have to go and kill all the mobs on a floor. You don't. You no
Mm.
longer have to go and pick up some random piece of
Oh, I
item
gotcha. Yeah, yeah,
and take it
yeah,
to
yeah.
to take it to
Door
a
or whatever.
platform
Yeah, to
or
unlock the key and all
key
that. Yeah.
for yeah. Now you can just rush through it and go straight to the boss,
I
which
don't know if
is
that's a good or bad thing.
I
Like,
don't either. I think it's very like on one hand, some of those things, some of those activities were pretty boring or kind of
yeah,
shitty.
that's true.
But on the other hand, it's like then you're now removing yet another thing that was necessary to complete the dungeon. So now it's turning it into just go straight to the boss, straight to the boss, straight to the boss. And
Yeah.
then it
I mean,
like
I
I don't know what that's really gonna do. But
yeah, I don't. It's hard for me, right? Because like you want to be efficient, right? So like pulling that stuff out like to a lazy person, right? You're like, fuck yeah, I don't have to run around. I think the biggest thing, right, is if there wasn't as much double backing, right? Like that was the problem. Is like you would run somewhere, get the key, and then you have to run all the way back through empty corridors with no extra mobs, right? And nothing extra, right? Like that's not good. Right, but if there was like a key and then like you needed that key for something further ahead, that you haven't got to yet to unlock something further. Like that makes sense, right? Like that's fine, right? Like you go get the key, do the event, get it, then carry it to the door, right? But now, like the way it was originally, right? You had to go and get four or three or however many, either like keys or tombs or whatever. Go get like kill stuff out to it, get the item, and then everything's cleared up to that point, right? So then you just run back with nothing else in your way, right? So it's just wasted time is what it felt like, right? Like because you're not progressing anywhere. You're going back to an original area, which is kind of silly, right? So like, but I feel like if you had that type of stuff and those events as the map kept going forward, that would be fine, right? But pulling them out, I don't know if that's really super beneficial or bad, right? Because like, what are people gonna do now, right? They're just gonna go into the map straight to the boss, right? Like
Yep.
complete it, get their mats, I guess. Like if they got their build or whatever, right? So that's my thing. It goes back to like, what do you want from this game, right? Like I feel like the concept right now is literally to focus on leveling, right? So these pulling those roadblocks, right, out of those levels, you're going to hit levels that people are going to run and focus running just for experience. Like they're just going to run it, get experience, right, until they cuz it let's be honest, right? Like as long as you have a few of your legendaries, right, till 75, you don't give a shit about like what the gear is, really. You just want those affixes to carry you, right, till you hit level 75. And then 75, you're going to start hunting ancestral stuff, right, for the same affixes, right? So like
Yep.
the game is literally going to be broken down into what, two sections, right? Like pre 75 and post 75. You know what I mean? Like, what do you do to quickly get to 75, right? All right, I'm going to hunt these four affixes. That's all I need for my build. I'm going to grind these levels to get to 75. And then once I hit 75, I'm going to farm these dungeons because they're the fastest to get this gear. That's what it's going to turn into. Like, there's not going to be like, hey, I want to explore. I'm going to farm this boss for this item, right? Like, there's no boss items either, right? Like, there's no specific loot to a certain
That
boss.
which is one of those things that they're trying to fix as well. They're trying to make it so that some of the end game bosses and stuff will be more in relation to like old school Diablo 2, where certain
Yeah.
bosses had certain items on them.
Yeah. I think it's too late.
Um,
I think it's too little too late, right? Like, people kind of see the ground, right? The basic foundation of what D4, what they built D4 on, and they're like, this has nowhere to go. And that's my opinion, right? That's my personal opinion. Is like it doesn't have anywhere to grow. You've pigeonholed people into specific items, into specific types of adventures, right? And then specific types of paragon trees, depending on what they pick. And that's not fun. That's not fun to anybody. Like
yeah,
nobody like.
the nuance, the idea of build diversity. Um, they keep stating that they're trying to make it so that it's more diverse, more options, but somehow they seemingly keep diminishing that and removing more options
Yeah,
through the
yeah, because
same
because they
decisions.
because of the and this it's like I said before, it's because of the foundation they've already set up, right? Like they created the game where the gear determines your build basically. Like, do you have this affix? Do you have this level? Right? Because they have different like normal, sacred, ancestral, right? Like tiers of gear. Right? Do you have this tier of this affix, right? Like, and that's all you care about. Like, you know what I mean? There's no hunting for like a certain item that has, you know, a certain type of unique attribute to it or, affix on it. No, you're literally X amount of items can roll this affix, so I need to find one of these items so I can either extract it and put it on an item, or two, to just find it as is, right, and upgrade it or change it to how it would fit best in my tree. Right? Like that's not fun, right? Like that's to me, right? Like, that's not. There's no growth in that. You're literally telling me specifically what you want me to roll, basically.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, after looking through these patch notes, we've pretty much got our opinion. We've got our idea. We think that Blizzard is there's 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 definitely people there that are trying to do something. I don't think they. I think they definitely lack direction. I don't think they're really implementing things that are supposed to be in the long term. Some of these changes are very par for the course for Diablo in general, and that is let's nerf a handful of builds so that we can pump up a couple other ones, and then people get the illusion of diversity in their builds.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just not going to be that way. We fixed a staggering amount of bugs in the game and issues. We also fixed the functionality of resistances, which I still just blows my mind that shit had. It took a whole season to fix. Um, they've dicked around with the XP. Like I said before, I think that's going to turn into some sort of shady shit. Maybe I'm wrong. Um, there's a lot of breadcrumbs to keep uh, anybody that is even remotely interested in this game coming back, and they'll come back in a few days to do this league, and you never know. In a week, I would say the best judgment would be wait a week. If after that week people are still enjoying it, you still see videos of content, people are still doing all this stuff, they're praising it, let it die down, and about a week to 2 weeks, if it's still going and it's still being played and it's still popular enough anywhere out there, then maybe that they're trying to bring it up, and maybe some of the things that we said were wrong, or maybe they weren't detrimental enough to affect it. Uh, that is the best way to state it, in my opinion. Um, Again, most of this stuff is just we fix bugs, and we also tried to implement some things that should have been there from the beginning, and then we tweak things. I I know we skipped the where's it at? It's down a little ways. Right here. We skipped this. This is the class balance updates. A lot of what we talked about was the fact that so much balance is literally in the hands of our legendaries and uniques and stuff. And
Yeah.
we individually, we only played, you played Barbarian and you played Druid. I played Rogue. We don't have too much experience with Necro and Sork. But the thing is, I don't think uh, we
I don't
have
think it's that
enough.
different. And this is so. Let's go back to just the overall the game, right? Like, I mean, I guess seeing how it goes is fine, but in my opinion, right? Like, I don't know. I'm pretty like negative after everything that's happened with D4, right? Like, one of the things I think it's too late, right? Like, I think their foundation is just too far gone, right? Like, they have too much foundational reliancies, right? Like, you have to have affixes, right? Which is one of the big things I don't agree with, right? Like legendary affixes and your Paragon tree, right, to go along with that. I think that it's too far. Like, I don't even think after a week or two, there's no way they can combat this, right? Like, because look at how many, like I said in the beginning, how many uniques that they're adding and like number changing they're doing for affixes already in the game to balance certain things, right? And this just gives more power to the items. Like, I don't want to play a game where the items dictate the what I'm building, right, or what I'm playing, right? And it's I don't. In my opinion, I think it's too late. Like the D4, I'm pretty sure it's pretty much dead. Like there's no.
I
I don't think there's a comeback for it
and the thing,
unless there's vast core changes, right? Like to the game play, like the how it's played. Right, like you have to get rid of affixes. You're gonna have to get rid of like some all these calculations, like different types of damage. Right, like it should be pretty simple. Like I'm power level, blah blah blah. I have these legendaries that change a skill a certain way, right? But not necessarily skew the damage one way or the other. Right, like maybe makes it spread or chain when it didn't before, or pierce when it didn't. Stuff like that. Like I think they have to reevaluate the game and like what they want to implement that's similar to D2, right? Because if you're trying to simulate, like, copy what D2 did correctly, right? They've done none of that correctly. Like the skill trees and all that other stuff, like the items aren't even close to what like original D2 was. The simplicity of it, right? Like you want your
Yeah,
character and the skill levels to build your character, not the items you find necessarily, not
I'm
always.
I'm pretty sure that right there is the fundamental issue. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in Diablo 2 and quite a few other ARPGs, you you realize, I really want to build this skill. Um, your whole goal was to grind out uniques or legendaries, or back then, what were they called? Not artifacts, but there were things that you
Runes.
grinded, runes. You
Yeah.
grinded that stuff out, and it wasn't because, hey, this build doesn't even work until I get to that point.
Yeah,
No,
exactly. Yeah.
my build works right now. I'm
Yeah,
just trying to
exactly.
farm the things that make it super strong, and
Exactly. Yeah.
that's not how this works in D4.
Yeah,
And
it's literally like if you like it's crazy because like if you get to level 70, 75, or 80 and you lose an affix, so say you find some ancestral upgrade that's like crazy good, but it doesn't have your affix, it's useless to you, which is crazy, right? Like it can be double the stats you're looking for, it could roll perfect, and if it doesn't have the affix until you re-roll that item, it's fucking garbage to you. Like what? Like that's not like if in PoE you found some crazy boots, triple resistance, move speed, whatever, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like some crazy. They're good for every class, or I mean, pretty much every class, right?
yeah,
They're gonna be strong on anybody, right? But like in this, it's not like it didn't roll the affix. Okay, I can't use it until I roll that. Like, what? It just it's like it loses the excitement of finding new gear, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
I don't look
Anything
at new
that
gear and go, "Oh, I'm excited. This rolled 850 or, whatever the high level was when we were playing 900. Ooh, this rolled 900 power level. I don't care. Did it roll the affix I need? Right? Did it roll the 3 stats I need? Like, no. Okay, well it's useless.
Yeah,
It,
what do you
it
mean?
feels bad.
What do you mean? That pair of gloves rolled vulnerability on hit whenever the moon is aligned with Mars and fucking something with Uranus. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
the the stats of this game are stupid.
Well, and it's
Um,
because there's so, like I said, they're overcomplicated. So many interactions, right? Like your affixes affect, like the type of damage it does, and then your Paragon tree will either increase that, right, or you have some other CC or something like utility in your Paragon. But most of it's gonna impact the type of damage you do, right? So your whole build is around your affixes, which enable you to either do crowd control damage, vulnerability damage or crit damage, or and I'm sure for the other class, I'm just going off druid, right? Because that's what I know, right? Those were like the three main damage bonuses: was crowd control, crit damage, and vulnerability, right? So like, and you always focused on the biggest damage increase first, right? So the first tree was like vulnerable damage, right? Because we applied vulnerability to everything just in our build naturally, right? We applied vulnerability. So that was the first one we increased, right? Next one's crit damage, and then blah blah crowd control or whatever, right? But it just feels shitty to build that way, right? Like I don't like this item rolled triple the stats I need, whatever, has the affix, right? Or close to it, but it's missing like one type of damage I do, right? Like it didn't roll crit damage, right? It has vulnerability and crowd control damage. Well, now that item's garbage. Like it's perfect in every other way, except that one item I couldn't get rolled on it or whatever.
I mean,
Now it's garbage. It's like what?
and that's another issue, and there's no reason to really delve into it. It's just pretty basic when you compare it to other games. You haven't played Last Epoch, but I have.
Yeah,
Last Epoch, in my opinion, has one of the best crafting systems so far in an ARPG. Close second would be PoE. Um,
yeah,
D4 doesn't have a crafting. Like it's got the illusion of
yeah,
a crafting, but it's like you can change one stat and you can put an
yeah,
affix on it. cool. It doesn't. That's not crafting. It renders large swaths of your gear useless, and I don't want to pick that shit up. Uh,
Yeah, and then
Give me a loot filter
you
that
start
just
getting like numb to it, right? You're like, oh yeah, another ancestral piece. Okay, let me pick it up. Look at it. All right, 900 eye level. All right, cool. As soon as you see one stat that's not one of the stats you need, garbage. Like, it's just like
yeah.
it's not fun to pick up.
That's literally the main issue when it came to the crafting. There's no crafting in the game. I don't even know why I keep calling it crafting. Uh, it just tricks you into thinking you have control over your gear, and then because of the fact that there isn't much of a crafting system, um, you end up vendoring thousands of items a day.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and the
but
other thing I didn't agree. I don't know if they changed it. I didn't see it in the patch notes, but they used to do if you saved a aspect, it would do like the lowest possible roll on it. You remember that? Like you could put it on an item, but it'd be like the lowest roll. So like actually it's even worse now, right? Because like if they're splitting up the sacred ancestral guild that much, you won't be not only will you not be able to get ancestral guild till 75, but two, you get sacred gear and then you have to keep finding and looting and rolling gear to roll like the stats you need, and then you're gonna have to replay. Then you have to do it all over again, right? So you're repeating the same cycle of finding the right affix, the right rolls on a piece of gear, right? Like multiple times. Like that is just crazy to me.
and that I think right there, I think that just highlights one of the reasons that we aren't very interested in the game. That we're giving it its time here in the spotlight, doing this, going through the patch notes, but um, the gameplay loop in this game is the rotation of gear, and it was very similar to Diablo 3 as well. But that's not how other games work. Again, we keep going back to PoE 2 or PoE. Um, in PoE, I could be level 60 and or 65 to 7. No, it was like 68 to 70 is when you really do end game. You can
Yep.
start doing Atlas stuff, and you could have the unique that you're looking for drop from that on. Hell, some of the greatest items in the game could drop even while you're going through the campaign.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the only thing that game was about was like item levels, and even then it's like, oh, I need an item level of this base type and I can just roll the stuff. You can jump on an auction house, and that right there shows another problem.
Yeah.
No active economy really puts
Yeah, that's
another
true.
damper on Diablo.
You couldn't trade, right? Isn't that another? Like, I don't remember being able to
You
trade
can't
anything either.
you can trade non-unique or non-legendary.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Which is even dumber because the only thing you care about is the affix. Whatever.
Yeah.
I
But
guess if it rolled perfect and you could trade a yellow to somebody and they can put the affix on, but it goes back to fucking the. I don't understand why they would allow you right all these. Like if they're that focused on affixes being your build, why when you save an affix it would only roll the lowest
no,
possible.
you got that backwards, dude. When you saved an affix, when you dismantled an item and saved the affix, we keep saying affix,
The aspect.
the
The
aspect.
aspect. Yeah.
When you save that aspect, it was whatever it rolled. That's what you saved. When you
I thought it was.
crafted,
I thought it was. I thought
no,
it was no because whenever you. Oh no no no. So we're talking about two different things. You're talking about when you would go in your inventory and then right click that affix that aspect specifically. You could you could transfer it over whatever it rolled. But I meant like when you go to a dungeon and you get that aspect unlocked and you just applied that base aspect to any piece of gear if you didn't have one specifically saved,
yeah,
it was always the lowest, right?
yeah.
So
That's true.
so we're both right, yeah. So like if you found one, right, and you saved it, right, and you could apply whatever it rolled, right? So there is that, right? Like that is part of So if you found like a really nice rolled sacred one that hold high numbers, yeah, you could save that aspect and put it on an astral gear. That is correct. But like, if you just have the aspect right, and you're trying to just make your build like viable, right? You have to apply these aspects that roll the lowest, which is also shitty, right? So then it just gives you another reason, right? And they're funneling you into that, right? To look for a better, higher rolled aspect, right? It might be shittier rolled stats, it might be shittier rolled affixes or prefixes on it, but you still are looking for like that perfect roll or whatever. And it's just I don't know. That's the other thing with D3 that I didn't like either is you wanted to fucking get what do they call it in that game? Fuck. There was like the normal version and then the like ancestral, but what was is it ancestral in D3? It might be ancestral. I think it is ancestral, yeah.
I think
So
you're right.
so it's the same thing. Yeah, you're hunting for the same gear with the same rolls and the same affix but ancestral. So you're doing the game loop twice at least, right? So in D4 it's even worse because you're doing normal gear to sacred gear and then sacred to ancestral. You're doing 3 times. You're doing the same grind 3 times.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, that's the I think that's the problem with Diablo 4. I don't we don't need to it's kind of beating a dead horse now, but that's it. Diablo 4 just focused its end game and its loops on the wrong things, even though they have some of the stuff that would have been viable before. Just the idea of progressing some sort of like in Path of Exile, you got the Atlas system. That's a progression system. There's a whole thing to do, but there's nothing to do here. It's the same dungeons that were in the campaign, and then you just have to go cycle through the loot arbitrarily because everything's gated by levels.
Yeah.
It's a loop that becomes boring very quickly, and I think that's why a lot of people quit the game after a short period of time. I don't think personally, I don't think the next season's going to be enough to pull it from the ashes. If it
No.
ever does, it's going to take an expansion or some pretty hefty changes.
I mean, they're so dedicated now to what it is, right? Like I don't, and I think they're stuck in this like what they have so far. Like I don't understand how they get stuck in this mentality that they can't revamp it. Get rid of the affix system. Period. Make everything strong. You know, I've talked about this in PoE too. Like PoE kind of does it. Like you can use almost any skill in PoE and be strong with the right gear, right? Like obviously there's some things that are better, right, or more efficient with less gear, right? But like, there's no reason in Diablo 4 they can't get rid of that system, and you can build whatever the fuck you want and still be viable. You know what I mean? And then as you progress with levels and power, if they still want sacred and ancestral, like sure, but that would be the scaling, right? That would be the grind, right? But instead of this fucking let me hunt these affixes, right? Like let me hunt these specific things or whatever and then I can build whatever I want, right? You would see some crazy. I guarantee you would see some crazy ass builds. You know what I mean? Like there's so many. Like how many skills did they kind of pigeonhole people into for each class? That's the other thing, right? Like for like barbarian, right? They had what hammer of ancients, whirlwind, and boulder. Are those the three?
Yeah.
Right? You have 3 skills. That's your main core skill for that
Yep.
class. Like, come on, man. Like three viable builds. That's it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, or druid. Like, come on. What?
And again, and anybody that might listen to this, they might think, oh well, what are you talking about? PoE, you know, every build guide, there's only a handful of builds that are viable for endgame. It's like, nah,
Yeah,
nah,
there's a
that's just
lot.
because there's so much nuance in that game that yeah, sure, the popular streamers or the popular, uh, people that do builds on some website, these are the ones they build. Guarantee you that even the goofiest shit in that game, with the proper setup and enough knowledge of the game mechanics, will be viable. and
Yeah.
that's why like I pull that out of the equation. Diablo should be able to, especially because it's not like levels that unlock this stuff. You unlock the second tier, which is all of your primary or your core skills. There's no reason why any single one that you want to choose can't be viable. But they did it again, just like they did in Diablo 3. No, only one's going to be viable. They'll do a patch note, a patch. It'll be a bunch of nerfs and a bunch of buffs, so it'll rotate it around, but it will never be all viable. Like they'll never allow it. It's almost like they purposely don't want you to have that
Yeah, I
much
don't.
diversity.
Yeah, understand that mentality. Like, it makes no sense to me. Like, you think you would want to encourage that type, right? Like creative, right? Because somebody's gonna create something. Like in PoE, there's some builds, right, that you like I've seen put together, and I like watched the video on how they did it. And like, oh, this ring interacts with this notable on the tree, and it gives you this immunity to this, and like you'll never take more than blah 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 damage so you can run low life and then you know what I mean like obviously after a year or two they see how like people are abusing it, right, and then they fix it. Like, cool, I get that, but like they allow it to happen, right, like, and then they go, okay, somebody figured this out, good for them, we let them reap the rewards for at least that season, right, or whatever, and then we fixed it later, right? Like, I'm totally cool with that. Like, I'm totally, I don't understand why more games don't have that mentality of let us break it, right? Like, let us figure some shit out that like you didn't think would interact a certain way that just fucking murders everything. And you'd be like, holy shit, look at this, right? And then like let us get the rewards, right? Don't hot fix it, right? And then be like, all right, next season, guys, we're gonna, you know what I mean? Like next season, we're gonna tune it down a little bit. Like, okay, all right, fair enough.
Yeah,
Right,
and
right.
that's the thing that PoE's been known for a very long time. Unless it's some interaction that's legitimately broken, they don't
Yeah,
fix it until the next season, which is
yeah, for
cool.
sure.
And
Yeah.
but on top of it, it's just like they figured out the most ridiculous, strangest interaction that nobody would have figured out because PoE is 12 years old or 10 plus years old and has so many mechanics and so many systems that somehow somebody went back and found that season 4 from 8 years ago had an item that just happens to interact with a new thing we did and a skill that we just added and it's
Yeah.
oh cool, they broke the game, let them have it. Your shit's getting nerfed no though next season. Fine, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But
I'm totally cool with that. At
Blizzard
least
every single
let it happen.
time Blizzard every single time it gets a little overpowered on something, they'll nerf it in the middle of the season. I think they did that
Oh yeah, for sure.
before. And I
Yeah,
know they've
hot
done that
they
before.
have much
They
everything.
hotfix it all the time. Yeah. But right now I guess the last thing is uh final opinion. My final opinion is this was a lot of fluff. I don't think it's doing much of a change. You pretty much resonated the same opinion here. This isn't
Yeah,
enough, and it's a
it's
lot
dog
of fluff.
shit. It's dog shit.
Yeah, it's a lot
It's
of
a
shit.
dog shit game, and they're not fixing anything really. I don't. It's hard, right? Because from their scope, right, they're trying to not reinvent the wheel, right? But I just there's no way they can recover this game loop and this game design without going back to the drawing board, and they're not gonna do that, right? Like,
And this is
there's not enough money invested in it now, right? Especially after it dropped off so hard, like,
yeah,
right? So we're gonna have to wait D5, right, or PoE2, right? Like,
yeah.
and see what the other newer generation RPGs are gonna give us.
I think this is just par for the course. This is what Blizzard does. Blizzard
Yeah,
hasn't made a unique IP since the Super Nintendo. Like everything they've ever done has been, hey, you know that thing that was really good and everybody likes it? Well, we just simplified it and made it more a wider appeal. And that's how every one of their games have been. It's always somebody else did it and they just did it a little better.
yeah. Well, now it's not even better. It's just like,
Yeah, and
hey,
that's the
somebody else
that's
did
the
this,
irony
and
of it.
we're gonna do it worse. Like,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Now they
Uh,
can't even do that. They
yeah.
can't even they can't even give us the whole they want to delete old games that were better, and then they release new games that are like, oh, by the way, a bunch of content we promised you years ago, we're not even adding that. Sorry, Overwatch. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
that was so sad. I
this
don't.
is,
Yeah.
but now maybe things will change because somehow this has to be in the upper echelons of the biggest acqui- bleh,
Acquisition.
acquisition. I don't know why I couldn't fucking think of that word. Damn. But the biggest acquisition I've ever seen when it comes to the amount, the cost amount, Microsoft just got Blizzard,
Yeah. I
and
mean, I
it's
think a
full.
part of that is just to buy it for the name, but also just to bury it. Like you know what I mean? So they can't use the name elsewhere on other things in the future, right? So they own the rights now, and I think they're just gonna bury Blizzard pretty
Hell,
much.
hell, like I said, this is just us BSing over a couple hours of the patch notes and kind of giving our opinion. We may get a half a dozen people that even watch this or flick around. I'll try to put some timestamps or something, but um, maybe that'll be a future sit down. We could talk about the acquisition and how long it'll take before we think Blizzard's gonna be nothing.
I think it's like already done. Like I'm pretty sure there's nothing is gonna. It's weird though because there's still BattleNet, so like maybe Microsoft uses Blizzard BattleNet as their Steam, right, to test some new game or something for Microsoft.
that that doesn't. Bl- BattleNet's probably going to go away soon. They're putting
Mm,
everything on Steam now.
I mean, that's also, I mean, that's a smart way to do it, in my opinion, right? Because you're gonna have the broadest spectrum of people, like availability.
Uh, to be fair, I think it's kind of a not necessarily a cop out, but more of a admittal of defeat. It's like, okay, put it all on Steam, and
Yeah.
irony. We didn't really try to defend Blizzard at any point in this entire thing, but Um, you got to give them some credit. Uh, Even with all the negative publicity and the drop off of this game, and the negative perspective of Blizzard as a whole for many years now, they decided to double down on their shittiness, and they're like we were just saying, releasing Diablo 4 the day the next season starts on Steam for $70. You don't get to transfer it. You have to pay.
Jesus.
You have to buy it again.
Oh my God. I didn't know that part of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, unless something suddenly changes by the end, but that's what people
Ridiculous.
say is that it will be full price on Steam, and it may be able to overtake Overwatch as the worst rated game on Steam. I don't know though. That might not be as popular as Overwatch. That's still like 10% positive rating or some shit like that. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think this was good.
We'll get him. I'll be right back. I'll go make a drink.
All right, yeah. Well, he's gonna go grab a drink. I'm gonna go ahead and close this out. Yeah, if you guys, anybody has any opinions, I know some of the stuff we talked about might have gotten a little out of hand. We may have talked about some things that we might have been wrong on. I can tell you right now, earlier on in the stream, we were talking about these uniques, and I think I read this one wrong. It actually says critical strikes, not overpower. So I might have been wrong on this one. I don't remember exactly what I said, but we're humans. We were just kind of ranting, getting a little bit off our chest. This is one of the games on our list of most disappointing games over the last like 20 years. If anybody would want to hear more, we got a bit of a list that we might talk about in the near future. Um, Otherwise, Rogers, infected. I'm going to sign out. We'll catch y'all later.